and in 2025 we made progress. We came down to 54, and in 2026 now we've gone up to 79.
So it's like we are fluctuating, going up and coming down.
And when you look at the people that release this thing, they are Reporters Without Border. And you know, we always say reporters, they are the foot soldiers of every institution. They are the lifeblood of the media institution. So, and these particular, they look at 5 factors. And amongst the 5 factors, the one that has problem, that has serious challenge globally, is the legal indicator. That is, they are saying that in across the world, you know, government and the security are using the legal indicator, legal instruments
to stifle journalists,
to stifle press freedom. Looking, come to Sierra Leone to show that indeed what these people are saying is true. We have this Cyber Security Act, you know, and we have been calling the Cyber Security Act is vague. We don't know what is cyberbullying. There is no definitive answer for what is this cyberbullying. So, and when you look at all of the issues that are surrounding cyberbullying, once you say something, they say, hey, it's cyberbullying. And to add salt to the wound, they brought in this Counter-Terrorism Act. That is also vague. It does not clearly define what you mean by an act of terrorism, you know, a message that can instigate unrest, all of these things.
Well, we are told this act will be taken to Parliament so that we can have a clear understanding of what it means, and where journalists would not be held liable when they are found wanted. Well,
it's as if, because one of the things that we always say, before they brought in the Counter-Terrorism Act, the spirit behind these 2 laws, they are very good. The cyberbullying is to protect people offline, fraud and other things on and offline. It's good. That is the spirit behind it. But in actual practice, it is stifling press freedom because the terms are vague. They are not clearly defined.
So we just hope the necessary.
And the Counter-Terrorism Act, it's to protect against, you know, terrorist attack and all of those things. But in actual practice, the terms are vague, and also it also stifles press freedom. And when you look on that day, SLAG is calling, and the entire media world landscape is calling for a stand-alone chapter in the Constitution that protects press freedom. Exactly. Something that we will not stop talking about. And this is the right time that we should advocate for it, because we are currently, they are currently amending the Constitution, which is the ground norm. We know that if they include a stand-alone chapter in the Constitution, any other act, you know, that comes in conflict with that which is in the Constitution, that act becomes null and void.
So we just hope the necessary ministries and departments and agencies that are concerned will actually listen to some of these cries that journalists are making, because it has been a long cry by us as journalists.
So we don't also want to limit it to the government. We are also calling on the opposition, because this particular bill, this constitutional amendment bill, is currently in Parliament, and they are to debate it. Please, we are calling on the government and also the opposition, APC. Can you guys please just listen to us and give us this what we want? We want press freedom, and please include that standalone chapter in this constitutional amendment bill. And at the end of the day, let us also feel that we are protected and we are free to do that which we love. Well, this is how we start the conversation. Well, we start from the quote. Our quote of the day is from an American educator, Horace Mann, and it says, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity."
The quote is deep.
The quote is deep, and I relate it to press freedom.
It relates exactly what we are talking about. So coming up in this edition of the program, President Julius Maada Bio commissions phase 2 of the 13 million tons per annum magnetite processing plant in Fembaya, Tonkolili district, operated by Leone Rock Metal Group.
And Right to Access Information Commission and the Anti-Corruption Commission signs a memorandum of understanding to work collaboratively in realizing and sustaining transparency and accountability through swift access to public information. Well, with all this, we invite you to participate by sending your text message to the number displayed on your screen or join us on Facebook at SLBC Live. The program you're watching is Good Morning Sierra Leone, live on the SLBC.
Program you're watching is Good Morning Sierra Leone, live on the Sierra Leone Broadcasting Corporation. You can be part of the conversation by sending your text message to the number displayed on your screen or send your comments on our Facebook page slbc.sl. It's now time for us to usher in a guest. On April 29th, 2026, Sierra Leone's President Julius Maada Bio commissioned phase 2 of the 30 million ton per annum magnetite processing plant in Ferembea, Tonkolili district, operated by the Rock Metal Group. This expansion boosts in country's benefits, producing a 66% grade iron concentrate. Phase 2 specifically adds another 10 MTPA capacity to the existing infrastructure as part of the broader 30 MTPA vertical integration strategy. The plant is a massive investment aimed at transforming raw ore into high-level magnetite iron ore, strengthen Sierra Leone's mineral export value. Alongside that, the commissioning President Bio oversaw the payment of the 5th Community Development Agreement CDA fund of $4.3 million to 3 chiefdoms in Tonkolili district, highlighting a shift towards ensuring mining wealth directly benefits local communities. The payment is part of the Community Development Agreement formed under the Mines and Minerals Act 2022. The facility has a capacity of 13 million tons per year. In the studio, we have the Chief Technical Officer, Leone Mining Group, Salim Sela. Good morning, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so would you put it into context, a clear understanding about this phase 2 of the 30 million per annum magnetite processing plant? What is it all about?
Okay, thank you very much. And if you recall, last year we commissioned a 10 million tons processing plant. And the way the iron ore deposit is in Tonkolili, for where we're currently operating, we have 3 layers. We have the DSO, which is the surface. We have been, well, since African Mineral days, they have been mining and exploiting the DSO to the point that it's almost depleted. And below the DSO, below the surface, we have what we call transition zone. We call it, geology says, saprolite. That's the weathered magnetite. And below that, you have the magnetite, okay? And normally, the grades of the iron ore at Tonkolili deposit is not very high. So as a result, you will have to do optimization for you to have higher grade, to have more export value, as you mentioned in your report. But also the government and the president, one of his flagship has always been value addition in country. So the value of this is the higher the value, the more the selling price of the oil is, that the government have to charge you royalty based on how much you sell. So if we increase the value, meaning we have to pay more royalty to the government, and the CDA as well, because CDA, you mentioned this, is a lot of money, and if the value is high, the CDA money also goes up. So Leone has been adding value over the years. We started exporting 57%, just like our predecessors did for 10 years. But we, in 2024, I believe your correspondents were there when we commissioned a 12 million tons processing plant. And 2025, we completed a 10 million tons magnetite processing plant. And this year, we've also completed another 10 million tons magnetite processing plant. As I'm seated here, we already started constructing a total 10 million tons magnetite processing plant, which will be complete next year.
So, Mr. Sila, when you say magnetite, I want you to, some people out there might be confused or are confused as to what you mean by this particular thing, magnetite.
Okay, basically in one word or sentence, for geologists, magnetite means is a rock that have high concentration of magnetic minerals. Okay, but for the non-geologist, a magnetite is a rock wherein you can extract enough iron material for you to be able to produce things like vehicle, iron rods, steel, and all these things, depending on the combination of the different types of composition that you include for you to produce the different things like bridges. You cannot do it without magnetite for a start. And houses we are building, vehicles, several other things. So it's a very important rock that has been part of mankind history, really. So we are fortunate to have one of the largest deposits in the world. I mean, Tonkolili iron ore deposit. The only disadvantage is the grade is not as high compared to places like Simandu in Guinea.
So, Mr. Sila, this particular plant that the president, 30 million tons or 30 tons, that the president has commissioned, you know, when you say value addition, is it that in Sierra Leone we start to see a situation where we now, you know, get different iron products from Leone? Because that's the idea that is going out, that when the president has commissioned this, you guys have added value and we will start producing our own.
Yeah, and actually that's where we go into, and that's why we see vertical integration, like we keep increasing, going up in terms downstream. And when Leone Rock started we actually acquired the license in 2020. So when people say Leone Rock, now we've grown so big, but people forget that we're really a very young company. We're only like 6 years old. And then Tonkolili iron ore mine was completely defunct. The processing plant were already devastated through vandalism and other means. The railway, the port, all of these things were completely, destroyed. We took over, but then majority of Sierra Leoneans, including people in the mining sector, and some people in the government, and some people also, our investors from abroad, say, oh, the president made a very big mistake, like giving a company like this such a project. It will never be able to function again. In 6 months, we're exporting. We fixed the railway, we fixed the port, we already fixed the processing plant that was there. But when the government was actually approving our license, we brought a plan which people really did not know why they approved our license. It was because we had a consistent plan that the ministry and the enemy saw, like, this looks like something that will work for this country. So we have worked through our phase 1, phase 2, now we are phase 3. So the phase you're talking about, that's what we are gearing towards. So we need to complete a 30 million tons processing plant. And we're also going to do another 30 million processing plant. So don't forget we have 12 million. As we speak now, we completed 20, so that's 32. Next year we complete another 10, that brings us to 42. We are going to build another 30, that brings us to 72 million tons processing plant capacity. So, and the benefit of this is we will have enough output, which will be like 25 million tons concentrate of iron ore, that will be able to give the company confidence to build a steel plant. So if we build steel plant, that's the final product, right, of iron, because when we export it, they produce or manufacture steel, we import the steel. So our intention is we want to get away from all of that. We have to manufacture the steel here from the ore, so we don't have to export raw ore anymore. But we have to get there. But that's not a small investment. It's really, really big. We're talking over $1 billion investment. We don't have the power capacity in this country at the moment, but we also do not have the iron ore concentrate sufficient enough to be able to construct a steel plant. But it's our plan to do so.
So when you say you don't have the power capacity, there was a time that I went up there, you know, the Leone has created that type of power capacity for themselves. You know, that one of your operating officers said that it can even give light to Freetown.
That's very true. Currently, we have excess power capacity. We even spoke with the Ministry of Energy that we don't mind sending some of our excess to Bumbuna, but I know it involves building transmission line, but that's a different topic altogether. But usually for mining investors, you're thinking of the upfront capital investment, okay? So this is why competition amongst countries, the key things is infrastructure. So if a country have the right infrastructure, you have rail, you have port, you have good roads, you have power. When mining investors seek to prioritize which country should I go, they have like a checklist. Do they have airport? Yes. Do they have railway? No. Do they have port? Yeah, no. You have, but you can build a port. That's a cost, right? So you think of your upfront cost. So now you come into a country that have all of this infrastructure. So the only money you think about is your machines to mine, meaning your upfront cost is smaller. So you go in, you build a mine, within 1 year you're already mining. But when you go into a country that do not have all of this, places like Kujerahun, Bon, they have iron ore. But the difference is you have to build a whole rail line to connect to a port and construct a whole port.
But when you came to that place, Tonkolili, you met a rail
exactly
and ports.
And that's why you see the speed with which Leone Rock is expanding. Currently in Africa, Leone Rock is the fastest growing company in Africa. But you know, in Sierra Leone, people, we do not normally kind of appreciate what is in the country. We always look at things outside. If people really can go and research the investment Leone Rock has done in the past 5 years, there is no country in Africa that have done that level of investment in the mining sector.
Okay, so let's talk on the community development fund that you gave to the people of the 3 districts in the chiefdoms in Tonkolili district. Apart from this, the fund that you gave, what other development activities do you put up in these chiefdoms that you operate in?
All right. So the first let's try to categorize this development. We have the statutory ones, which are mandatory because they are law, like the CDA is law. All companies have to do it. We have what we also call CDAP, that's the Community Development Action Plan, which is also a statutory obligation on companies, because before you are issued EIA license, the EPA will tell you you have to allocate certain amount of money to offset the inconvenience you create in the community. So we have CDAP, that's also mandatory, but we also have CSR. So I want to talk about the mandatory ones first. The mandatory one, which is CDA. Before we took over Tonkolili and Ore Mine, you know, mining has been going on there for a very long time through African Minerals and then Shandong Steel. But those communities never ever saw CDA. So for them, like, CDA is like a paper, something on paper, but like the money never comes because they never had. And African Mineral was one of the largest iron ore exporters in Africa at the time. But those people never ever saw CDA in 10 years. So even when we came in, we wrote letters to people, inviting people like, we're going to pay CDA. They didn't even know what, like, is. Okay, maybe they're going to announce and everybody go home. And the president said, do you know this money is in your account? That's when everybody started clapping because they are not used to it, okay? So we are very transparent. I've been paying every year and the money goes in the account. So it's not something like this political statement, because we are a corporate institution. We talk what we do, all right? So we've been paying over the years. I will talk about what that money has been used for later. And we also have CDAP. The CDAP, we've done a lot of schools. But CDAP money is not like the company just go, oh, we're gonna do well for you today, or we're gonna do a communities. No, the communities will decide. Our priority for this year is we want to like do a school, and we utilize the money towards the school. The reason why we cannot give them the money, because we also have to report to EP every year. They have annual audit. They will come, how did you spend the money? So if we give it to the community and they do not spend it, EPA will penalize us. So we have to monitor and make sure these monies are spent on for the right purpose.
So Mr.
Just
Silla,
like the CDA.
Mr. Silla, when you talk about this CDA, I've been to that place several times, several engagements. You know, when the community, different communities are talking, the construction of that mineral that enters within those communities is one of the burning desire of the people. So when you say the things, the pressing need of the people, they'll tell you, and then you do it year by year. And you're a company of 6 years old, and now you are boasting that. You are boasting that you are amongst the fastest growing company in Africa. And you know, we see that road that leads to that particular mine. It's in this current state as it is. Is that not a priority to the people? Have they not, you know, signaled this to you that please construct this road for us?
It's a priority to the company. We are only 6 years old, but almost all the other big companies that have been here over 20 years, some even 40 years. Their roads are more deplorable than ours. You know, like I always say, we have to differentiate reality from expectations. The expectation is we could build all the roads in this country because we are Leone. That's expectation, but the reality is not our job to do that. That's the obvious fact. And our job is not to build public infrastructure. Our job is to pay royalty to the government, and the government could do public infrastructure. But the good news is, through the wisdom of the President, His Excellency, last year, when he went to do the CDA payment, he actually made a proclamation, which is like, I mean, ingenious idea, never been done anywhere in Africa. He proposed that he wanted to have the community, the company, and the government to partner to construct that road, which is very ingenious. I tell you, many African countries will start coming here to research how that's done, because it's the first time in Africa, like, the government is using mining royalties or money from mining to create a partnership, like a joint venture between government, community, everybody putting money. And it will surprise you. Do you know how much the community is going to contribute? $16 million. That's what that community will contribute towards the construction of this road in the history of this country. So they will pay that money over a period of 10 years, because we're going to pay CDAs consistent money. And Leone Rock also, in the history of probably West Africa, we're going to give $24 million for the construction of that
so
road. The government will
you
give the majority of the money. That's the fact.
So how far are you with that?
We have done MOU, we've signed MOU, we've done all signing with the government. Currently, actually, as I'm 10 o'clock, we're supposed to have a meeting at the Ministry of Finance with one of the banks. So we're currently discussing on financing with different banks. But the interesting thing is, even Sierra Leonean banks are also interested, because, like I say, this is like going to be the first time. So any bank that's fortunate to be part of this, you will be like, everybody in Africa will start looking for, how did you guys do this? So all the banks really want to participate in this funding, because it's really ingenious, and I wish it goes through. And also positively, because Leone Rock has always set the pace for other companies, even though we are young. And other companies also in this country are also trying to adopt the same model to do. So you will not be surprised, places like Moyamba now, Sierra Leone might also adopt the same model, but ours has to be successful for them to see like this can work. So yeah, your question is very valid. The communities are really concerned, we are also concerned, but fortunately we have the right idea to make it work now.
So let's talk on the CSR, so your CSR towards the top quality districts that you're operating. Yeah. We are categorizing the CDAP, the CDA, and you were speaking on the CSR.
Yeah, I think it will also be very fair to talk about the CDA a little bit, what they have been using the money for, because I believe viewers will say, oh, this company has been paying, like you said, five, we paid actually 6 times. And people will say, so what? This money, maybe the government is taking the money, or maybe the paramount chiefs will be buying vehicles or building houses, or even me becoming signatory to the account. Probably I'm buying properties or flying abroad with the money. No, that's not really true. They have structured system how this money is managed, and that's through the Mines and Minerals Act of 2009. They have a structure which is set up. We have a CDC, we have a steering committee, and it's managed by the enemy, the company, the paramount chiefs, youth leaders, women leaders from the communities, even religious leaders are part of that composition of people. So over the past years, the CDA has been awarding scholarships to students that come from those areas. If you have the university, of course, criteria, if you fulfill it. So they've given up to 725 students, full scholarship in different universities, and this is paid by the CDA. We've been paying UU teachers, for those small communities. You don't have people that qualified properly that will go and work there. Everybody wants to work in the cities.
Okay.
So to encourage, we pay those. We build health center, like fully equipped health center. And this year we are embarking on another historic project. We're going to do water project, and this will be pipe-borne water that will benefit up to 80,000 residents in the 3 chiefdoms at a cost of about 102 billion leones. All leones, 102 million leones. Sorry, I keep mixing these things up. Yeah, 102 million leones. So that's also historic for a community to fully fund a project of that size. It has never happened in this country before.
So how's the monitoring mechanism like, ensuring that these funds are being used for its intended purpose?
So it is when money, like I said, the government is part of it, through the National Minerals Agency, and also through the local government, because the council is also part of it. But for every contract that's awarded, you have to go through the NPPA, of course, because it's public money.
Okay.
So it's well monitored.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is Salim Sela is the Chief Technical Officer for the Leone Metal Group. As he has been taking us to President Bio commissioned phase 2 of the 30 million tons per annum magnetite processing plant in Ferrara, Tonkole, Lake State. From there, we take a health tip of today. Today, we look at how often you should shower. Shower frequently depends on your activity level, weather conditions, and individual skin needs. Daily showers can help with hygiene and odor. Let us watch and learn.
There's a lot of different reasons, different considerations when we look at like how often one should shower and, what you're using to shower with. So I think a few important points, just culturally, we have bacteria on our skin, in the hot, humid, wet weather, we have sweat, bacteria, all sorts of stuff. So just from like a personal hygiene standpoint, I think showering daily is not a bad idea. When we sweat, there is bacteria, yeast, and other organisms that live in our sweat. So when we perspire, there is usually a scent to it. And, some people perspire more than others, depending on your cleanliness and just your, the area you're in, environment, how much you sweat. So, normally in our skin, there's bacteria that's there, and then sweating kind of amplifies that. We also have yeast that live in our skin, our scalp, the oily areas of our body. So all of that together can kind of create an odor, if you will. So just showering and kind of removing some of that bacteria, dead skin, yeast can help with the odor there. Expectations, whether you're work, school, just day to day, like your cleanliness and your appearance. Other factors like your lifestyle or activity level. If you're a swimmer, you might want to get that chlorine off your skin. If you're someone that sweats and works out a lot, whether in the summertime, you might feel it, more inclined to shower more often. When it's cold, maybe not as frequently, or maybe just putting soap on those sensitive areas. Also looking at people with different skin conditions, if you've had surgery or if you have like eczema or sensitive skin. And then other factors like environmentally, if you're trying to conserve water, access to water. There's a couple things when you look at showers, like if too much of anything can be a problem. So if you're using water that's too hot, that really hot water can pull moisture out of our skin. Also, depending on what you're using to cleanse your skin, body washes or soaps that are fragranced, if they're antibacterial, certain ingredients can again pull moisture out, and some of those fragrances and scents can even irritate our skin and flare up like eczema or contact dermatitis. So if you're getting any kind of irritation on the skin, or if it looks like dry, people describe it as like lizard skin, it means you're either not moisturizing enough, or you're showering too much, or perhaps using a cleanser that is too irritating to the skin. So if you need to shower multiple times a day, that's fine, but maybe limit the soap you're using and then the areas you put the soap on. And then if you can, moisturize after each shower. That would be ideal.
I hope you've learned a lot from that video, especially for those who don't like to wash. You know that doing a daily shower is very good for hygiene and also odor. So please, let us be doing it daily. At least twice daily, or maybe once daily. Well, we continue the program to another issue. The Rights to Access Information Commission (RAIC) and the Anti-Corruption Commission (ACC) signed a memorandum of understanding on Wednesday, 29th April, to ensure that the two public institutions work collaboratively in realizing and sustaining transparency and accountability through swift access to public information. Dr. Ibrahim Shagat Shaw, the Chairman and Information Commissioner of the IIC, noted that the mandates of both institutions are crucial in promoting an open and corruption-free society. In the studio on how the MOU will be implemented, we have the PRO of the ACC, Alex Eba, and the Public Information Communications Officer, IAIC, Ama Tonka. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome to the SLBC.
Good morning, Emmanuel. Good morning, Mariam. Thank you so much.
So, I want to start with the IAIC. You signed a memorandum of understanding with the ACC. On what basis or on what premise did you decide to say, okay, let's go to the ACC and sign an MOU with them?
Thank you very much. It all boils down to the mandate of both institutions. The mandate of the Right to Access Information Commission, as clearly spelled out in the Right to Access Information Act of 2013, is actually to facilitate access to information held by public authorities or institutions, private institutions providing services for public authorities. And if you also look at the Anti-Corruption Commission, the mandate of the Anti-Corruption Commission is also to prevent corruption, to fight against corruption, and to also prosecute corruption. So if you look at the two mandates, they have a path where they cross, and that path is actually to ensure that we have a transparent, accountable, and also a governance, a good governance, related society. So the accountability, transparency, and good governance are crucial. They cut across the two mandates of both institutions. The actual mandate of the Right to Access Information Commission at the end of the day is to enhance accountability, transparency, and good governance. The actual mandate of the Anti-Corruption Commission is actually to ensure that the society is transparent and is accountable and we have good governance. So we have that commonality in our mandate. So the leaderships of both institutions thought it fit to ensure that we have an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, where we will clearly spell out areas that will build synergy, where the two institutions can collaborate to ensure that we do, in terms of public education, on the relevance of access to information, in preventing or fighting against corruption, and a whole lot of other issues as we go along that we'll discuss. But that is the intent of the Memorandum of Understanding.
Okay, let me bring in Alex. Alex, has the ACC been struggling to access information whilst under investigating institutions? Because when I saw this MOU, I was some kind of confused, saying that the ACC, the mandate that the ACC has and the powers that is vested on the ACC, I don't think the ACC will be struggling to get information from institutions whilst investigating individuals. So have you been struggling?
Yes, first off, signing an MOU to forge partnerships between accountability institutions does not necessarily mean that an institution like KCC, we have been challenged in a way to have information. Like you said, I mean, you're very correct. The Anti-Corruption Act is very powerful. It makes provision for public officials or public institutions to provide information when requested. But way and beyond that, the Right to Access Information Act of 2013, it makes it incumbent on government institutions to provide information, not just reactively, for example, when we're doing investigations, when we request information, but also proactively. So that is why such an institution was established, because first off, or fundamentally, information access is as of rights. And so we as an accountability body, and the fight against corruption hinges squarely on how much information can be provided, because when information is withheld, when systems, they operate opaquely, or when institutions basically their functions and operation is in silos, that in itself is a red flag. So we forging partnership with both institutions is to both not just reactively but also proactively ensure that many government institutions out there, they, without being asked, know that they have to ensure that they provide information to the public.
So,
before this
Alex, I want to come. The ACC, have you been challenged in getting information proactively? Because you are now saying, you know, it's not just about, you know, during the time that you are investigating institutions, but proactively. So, whilst you putting out circular for people to submit certain information, have you been challenged in getting those information proactively?
So first of all, when we say proactive information, is for institutions to ensure that everything that borders around their work, whether an institution like KCC instituting an investigation or making a request, they should have those information available. That is where the Right to Access Information, they are being provided support with an instrument, the Right to Access Information Act, which gives them the legislative powers to ensure that they enforce proactive information. So we have not basically been challenged with accessing information when requested, but what we intend to do, both institutions, is to ensure that across the board, public institutions, they, you know, for example, they had been organizing programs before this time wherein they would call out institutions, they award them certain institutions that have been doing quite well in proactively providing information. One of those institutions, they've time and again reference as an emblem and a template for proactive information that other institutions should basically template in terms of how information should be spread across within the governance space is the ACC. So the nature of our work and how critical it is and how much we want other institutions to understand these things is the reason why when you go to the ACC website, it is updated on a daily basis on everything that we do that cuts across investigations, that cuts across public education, prevention, and all of those things. So we want these things to be entrenched in other government institutions, so that even if we say we want to investigate certain, you know, acts or instances of corruption, it will make it more or less easier or more easier for us and many other institutions maybe that would also want to make similar investigation. But way and beyond that, it is not only about enforcement of certain powers within institutions like the ACC, but it is also, like I prefaced, that information access especially in the 21st century, is as of right.
Okay.
And that is that right that we want to maximize.
So, Mr. Tonka, as a commission, have you been having complaints from people that want to have access to information as to regards the activity, considering the cases ACC deals with? Have you ever had complaints from them not withholding some certain information from them?
Well, generally, aside the Anti-Corruption Commission, we are actually migrating, all of us know we are migrating from a culture of secrecy to that of openness. And we are now in a century, even when you want to be that secretive when it comes to information that you are supposed to publicly disclose, you can't do that forever because of the sophisticated nature of our society. And we've been having a complaint. That's why in the access to information structure, you have the access to information, you put out a request for information, and the institution acknowledges, receipt of that request for information. And if the institution provides the information, that's nice. And but there are instances, we've been saying those instances here, timelessly, that there are indicators, there are certain exempt information that cannot be provided. So if the requester feels that such information is to be provided, or the way the information is provided, he or she is not satisfied, the requester can complain. So that's where your question comes in. We've been receiving a lot of complaints from either institutions or individuals that not just institutions not providing information, but the manner in which the information is provided, because the Right to Access Information Act provides that if information is described by the Act, if it fulfills the element that should make that information not to be disclosed, you as an institution should look at the information critically to see if the whole information falls under what we call exempt information, or just part of the information. So sometimes we see those complaints where the individual will say, I know part of the information I'm requesting falls under exempt information, so I'm not requesting for that exempt information that is part of that whole information. So the institution has that responsibility to now take out just that exempt information. Let's say it's a document of 50 pages and you only have 5 pages in that document that are exempt information. So you take out the 5 pages and then you communicate to the requester that these 5 pages are exempt information. So the remaining 45 pages, are information that can be disclosed. So it's not about institutions not just providing information, but the manner. Sometimes you just have just one page in a 100-page document that is exempt, and they will now classify the whole document to be exempt information.
Okay, so Alex, how will this MOU speak to you giving out information to those asking, especially considering the kind of cases you're dealing with? At times you discuss ACC have caught so and so person doing this, but the name of the person is withheld. Sometimes you class it as classified information. So how would this MOU speak to that?
Yes,
because as you heard from him, they have been having concerns for members of the public.
And
and
just taking a cue from what my colleagues say, if you look at that line, that point, the ACC, one might be saying they are somehow guilty of that side, for that part, because some people have been saying, you said you are investigating people, or you found people wanting for some of this thing. Why is these individuals they not coming out, or the individuals, the person himself not coming out to the public?
So that's why it's a good thing that RIC is here, Amara is here, and he did say very clearly that certain institutions or institutions that those complaints have come against to them, it has not been the ACC. We have been one of the most compliant institutions when it comes to providing information, both reactively and proactively. It would interest you to know that we have an information desk, established information desk at the ACC. That desk has a function to more or less welcome people, researchers, students, journalists, or anybody that comes to the ACC and they want any information about certain matters that we're investigating, convictions that we've had in court, or any other questions that they would want to ask about the ACC, they come to that desk. We provide information. We have data about all of the people that comes at the end of the day or at the end of the year, and every one of our annual reports which we have presented over the years to the president. If you look in that annual report, you will see all of those data there. So that is first off to say we provide information. It is not just about us accepting invitation, or most often making requests to be in programs like this to amplify some of the things that we're doing. Our work is basically not done in secrecy, because it is very important and very critical that we fill in any gap whatsoever. Because
So
when
Alex,
there is gap, then it could
so
easily
Alex,
skewed.
SEC is saying that someone has stolen 10 billion and withholding the person's name. You coming out saying the person has done this and you are keeping the person's name. How is that information classified?
So
how do you classify such information?
So every one of those instances where we've had matters that has to do with misappropriation, we have made it known who are the persons involved in every one of those instances.
Are you sure?
Yes, in every one of those instances. Now, we are one institution that, first off, we have one of the most potent public education outfits. We pull press releases. When we were dealing with annual reports, we were handling issue by issue. And in every one of those issues that we used to handle, we were not releasing what we call our usual press releases. We were releasing media releases, and some of those would take 5 or more pages, in which we would highlight all of the issues, all of the institutions, and all of the individuals involved. Now, when it comes to our usual press releases, for all of the matters that has to do with misappropriation, all the offenses within the 27 offenses of the ACC Act, which individuals have been found wanting about, we have our press releases which we put out. And those press releases will detail the individuals. And that is why even when we say, we quantify many a time, say we've recovered over 8 billion leones within the past 7 or 8 years, we inform people as well that if you go and check in our website, if you have not been following every now and then our publications, you would see how we have accumulated all of those cases, our recoveries when it comes to non-conviction, even if we're not charging to court. The individuals involved, for example, I would make certain instances like when we were dealing with this SLRA matter that involved about 8.6 billion leones. At the end of the day, when we had the money, the full amount of money recouped and recovered, we had our press releases out in which we named all of the individuals that were found wanting and all of the actions we had taken. So that is why I'm making it very sounding clear that there had been no such instances in which we have recovered monies and we have kept the names of those individuals. But like you stated,
So Alex, this one that you are saying, and if we continue go on. But let me come to Mr. Tonka. In this MOU, everyone has its own role to play. What is the role of the IIC in this MOU with the ACC? What is your role?
Well, the MOU is actually speaking more on the broader joint, responsibilities of both parties. The IIC is there to ensure that we establish, as I said, it's more on the joint responsibility. The MOU speaks on joint responsibility to establish what both parties, call the public accountability, committee, and which is actually a novelty when it comes to both fighting corruption, jointly fighting corruption and access to information. The leaderships of both institutions thought it fit to establish a joint public accountability committee that will be meeting and also share ideas and in terms of our policies and also our laws to see how we can, as I said initially, form that synergy wherein we will actually use our expertise, the ideas of both institutions to develop and promote this culture of access to information, and using that culture to prevent and fight against corruption. Because like you rightly said, if we so much focus on proactive disclosure, this whole idea of people even alleging would be reduced drastically.
Okay.
Talk less of prosecution. Even the allegation will reduce if we go by proactive disclosure strictly. Because let's say you do something, you receive public funds, and then you put it out, because that's one of the 22 classes of information under the Right to Access Information Act that should be disclosed. That have received $22 million from the government, and this is how I have spent the money, and the evidence is there, and they can check, they can do professional evaluation to know that the money was spent judiciously. Okay. And there will be very little need for all allegations, because the evidence is there. So that's why we are forming this partnership, so that the public authorities and institutions providing services for public authorities pay more attention on disclosing information proactively, so that the vices that come with non-disclosure or secrecy, we can reduce them or avoid them completely.
So, Mr. Tonka, shortly, this particular committee that you're talking about, will the people at the end of the day be seen where the IRS will be very, very proactive in putting out the names and even photos of individuals who must have stolen or misappropriated public funds? Because one might be saying, if the individual is not ashamed to steal the public funds, why should the institution protect their faces?
Now, one of it is clear in the MOU that notwithstanding the partnership we are trying to establish, one institution should not be seen exclusively doing the work of another institution. These are distinct institutions. The mandate of the Anti-Corruption Commission still stands. It's not for us to dictate to them, and it's not for them to dictate to us. We are actually forging this partnership to ensure that we build more synergy, and to ensure that we use access to information to prevent and fight against corruption.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex, in just 30 seconds, the same question goes to you. Will we see a situation where you no longer just put out press releases and just highlight the names, but individual faces comes out that steals public funds? Because those monies that those individuals must have siphoned is meant to uplift the night of the common man.
Yes, so first off, like he said, maybe just to resound emphatically, that they are there to facilitate public institutions, whether it's the ACC or other institution, to make information available, not necessarily performing the roles that other institutions actually have. We have been doing it in every one of those cases that we have charged the court.
Will you scale up to put out the phases? Because we'll be seeing your press releases just names, but people want to see their faces.
So the press releases, it makes provision, because we make some of these publications here and there. It makes provision for the names, sometimes the institution, and the addresses of all of these individuals, and it's very clear. So sometimes when journalists or bloggers, they are very powerful now, they reach out, they request the picture of these people, we put it out. But even when these people take to their heels, when we pull wanted notice, sometimes you see the faces of these individuals. But press releases requires, as we often do, the names, the addresses, and the institution and position, which is already exhaustive of those individuals.
Thank you very much. And Alex Eba from the ACC and Amara Tonka from RIS, they have been talking about the MOU that both institutions have signed to further the accountability fight in this country. Well, this is how the Good Morning Sailing flip to another segment in the show, which is the review of the headlines of our local tabloids. I start the ball rolling with Standard Times newspaper, and it says, His Royal Majesty Azinge visit Jala University. A unifier for a new era, while Juliet Jallo fits Bio's test of leadership. SLPHA engages Emirati investors. These stories plus more you find in the Standard Times newspaper.
Pyramid newspaper banner headline says FDC bans students club activities after campus violence. CSO slammed 44 entities over missing financial reports. And Parliament leads digital access dialogue. These stories and many more you can find on the Pyramid newspaper.
And the next one I have is the Oko newspaper that says Visit Leone hosts over 100 tourists on seasonal Freetown historic tour. Ban partner demand sanctions over financial breaches by 44 public entities. APC's Honorable Rosemary Bagwa wins vice chairperson of Pan-African Parliament. This story is plus one you find in the Oko newspaper.
In the newspaper banner headline says Labour Congress endorses Gentle Group's Kent Seaport project. These stories and many more you can find on the Greener newspaper.
And the last one I have here is a satellite newspaper that says revealed 30-year jail term for drug offenders. SLPHA engages investors on port and railway development. These stories plus more you find in the satellite newspaper.
Africa 24 Communications newspaper banner headline says Aki Sawyer's successor resurfaces. In strategic talks on port expansion and railway development, SLPH engages Emirates investors. Rise and fall of Chief Kanagbaru. These stories and many more you can find on the Africa 24 newspaper. Well, viewers who must quickly know that these headlines read out does not reflect the views of the SLBC, or we are merely reviewing them. Well, on that note, that's how we draw the curtains of Good Morning Sierra Leone that came to you from the Sierra Leone Broadcasting Corporation. Many thanks to our producer, Daphne Zainab Kamara. Good Morning Sierra Leone to be returns tomorrow. I am Esther Sako.
And before we go, let's take the quote again. It's from American educator Horace Mann, and it says, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory." Good Morning Sierra Leone returns tomorrow, same time. I have been Emmanuel Samuel. Stay glued to the SLBC. Goodbye.
As a mother of the house, whenever I want to prepare palm soup, there's no need pounding palm fruit. All I need is Nkulenu's Ghana's original palm soup base. My soup is done, and its preparation, it is not difficult at all. Nkulenu palm soup base, it's easily done with no difficulties. Just take few ladles and your soup is done. And its flavor, it's amazing. This is Nkulenu's Ghana's original palm soup base. And this is Nkulenu's Ghana's original spiced palm soup base. Iron fruit and turkey berries are naturally added.
Also available Brown Gold Natural Cocoa Powder, Sunny Gold Brown Sugar, Neat Fufu Flour, Shito, Pisa, and Moringa. All available at Nyami Ado Enterprise, 1 Lower Waterloo Street, Freetown.
Nkulenu palm soup base.
Ghanaian original taste.